Hi, I am so excited to tell you about my time with the elders from the Waata and the Waata community. But let me give you the big picture. This two-room schoolhouse was built because their children had to walk 5 miles one way to school in high temperatures and along roads where wild animals roam. In fact, the chief's father was killed by a wild water buffalo. Years ago, I asked the women if they sent their children to school.
Your hands, how many of you have children who walk to school or should be walking to school? Let me see your hands. How many of you are afraid to send your children because it's such a long walk and there is danger?
Ni wangapi wanaogopa kutuma watoto wao kwa sababu ya hii barabara na usalama jiani?
Oh my goodness.
Most of them said no. This is why the chief approached me. He asked me if I would be willing to build a two-room school because he knew that without an education, they had little to no hope as a people. I came back, and through generous donors like you on this email list, God raised up the money for the building. One summer, Bob Saunders, one of my board members, and I actually helped dig out the pit for the bathrooms. But finally, the school was built, teachers were hired, and the next year, Debbie and I went down for the grand opening. The school is now in its third year. We have pre-kindergarten and kindergarten in the mornings, and then grade 1 in the afternoon, with one of the rooms empty in the afternoon. Next year, in 2025, we will have grades 1 and 2 in the afternoon, utilizing both rooms and the school for the entire day. But as I've been praying for these children and for these people who are 100% Islamic, I began to realize that they needed to be taught the 10 Commandments to get them on the right track. I am more and more convinced that they are foundational for understanding what God is doing. So a day before our large Kenya team left to go back home to the United States, I flew out to visit the school. Peter and Lydia picked me up and took me to their home. The next morning, when I was supposed to talk to the elders, I felt uneasy. I was questioning myself and having doubts. Should I really do this? Was it the right thing to do? I prayed the only prayer that I knew to pray, and that was this: Lord, I'm going to show up. You've got to take it over from there. And that's what God did. Men and women, I have found out that a lot of my ministry is just like this. It's just showing up. Well, when I arrived, the children were so excited to see me since school was just being let out, and they sang a song to me in honor of me being there. Eventually, we got to meeting with the elders. I had asked for a 2 to 3 hour meeting with them, and I started out asking them how it was going. But they only gave one-word answers. Oh, it's good. Fine. All this through translation. I started thinking, my goodness, this is going to only last 15 minutes at this rate. More doubts came to me. So I started asking, well, why is it going good? Well, they gave me more detailed answers, to which I was thankful, but it still wasn't very long. I then asked questions that I had prepared, but that is when the Lord took over. I asked, if you had to choose between your children being rich, educated, or good, which would you choose for them? They all said, educated. I said, okay, let's talk about what is happening in America. I started talking about women getting the right to vote and women getting equal pay in the marketplace, which is all very good. But then I told them that it began to grow from there, and it was about being okay for women to love women and men to love men. I then helped them see that it even got worse, where it is now okay for a girl to want to be a boy and a boy to want to be a girl. And they can compete in sports, and it's okay for a man to be able to have a baby. And their educated doctors are taking a girl's body and cutting up to make it look like a boy, so they're cutting their breasts off. They were in shock. I then asked them, who do you think thought all of this up? They had no idea. So I told them that it came from those with the highest degrees from the most prestigious universities. They are the ones who teach the teachers, and the teachers are the ones who teach the children. They got the picture. Education is not the ultimate answer, though education is desperately needed, but education without wisdom is useless. Then I went on to ask them about riches. I said, are your politicians rich? They all answered, yes. And what do they do for you? They said, they steal from us. So is having money the answer? They all said no. They then realized that the only option left was for their children to be good. So I went on with another analogy that I also got from Dennis Prager. All this stuff comes from Dennis Prager. I made up a story about a father who put his son through college. His son majored in poetry. He knew all the great poets and did great poetry himself. He was very skilled. But upon graduation, he wanted to fly a plane. So his father was very rich. He bought him a plane, gave him the keys, and said to him, "Be a good pilot." I then asked them, "What's wrong with this story?" And they said, "That's suicide. He's never been trained in how to fly a plane and how to be a pilot." Well, it was then that I brought up a child who happened to be in the meeting and said, "We tell our children, be a good child, but we don't teach them what it means to be good." I then began to see some of the lights go off in their mind. They realized that they weren't teaching their children how to be good. So I told them the story of the 10 Commandments and how they were brought about. I explained to them that God had his people come out of Egypt. But when they came out of Egypt, they had freedom for the very first time, but they didn't know how to use their freedom. So God said, "Hey, I'm going to help you with your freedom so you can have a healthy society. I'm going to give you 10 commandments that will help you as a people." So many people think that the 10 commandments are here to hinder us. They are not here to hinder us at all. They're here to help us as a community, as a society. So in reality, it's a win-win situation for everyone. I then went through each of the 10 commandments and talked about how they will help their community, their tribe, and their children. What I did find very interesting is when I talked about adultery and how walls can get built up between men and women when adultery happens, I said, "How does this affect the kids?" One of the men said, "Adultery affects the children? I had no idea." He was clueless. After going through each of the commandments, I then told them about God's review in Leviticus 26. In that review, God basically says, "Look, I'm going to send you over now through the desert and then into the promised land. So let me review some things." Leviticus chapter 26, the verse 30 says, "If you keep these laws, I'm going to bless you." But in the last 2/3 of the chapter, he says, "If you don't keep them, I'm going to discipline you severely, and I'll come after you until you come back to me." And when I was reading over the curses that God said he would send them if they disobeyed him, some of them said, "That's what's happening to us." A very interesting side note here. In the text, God says, "I will unleash the wild animals on you." We think, "Oh, how barbaric." But they don't think that at all. Remember, the chief's father was killed by a wild water buffalo that had been scaring the older children on their way to school. They knew exactly what that text meant. The scriptures are very up to date. All of this took about 2.5 hours. Then I told them that I had flown all the way from America to ask them one simple question. I told them that they were the leaders of the tribes. They're the elders. Therefore, I did not want to do anything behind their backs. So I was coming to them to ask them permission to tell the teachers that they could teach the 10 Commandments to the kids. At this point, my friend and interpreter, Peter, the pastor who picked me up, he and his wife, he took over. He said, "Listen, who has raised the money from his friends for this building?" They all said, "Bob." "Who pays the teacher salaries?" They all said, "Bob." "And these 10 commandments, are they going to make you Christians?" They said, "No." "Are they going to make you go to church?" They all said, "No." "So raise your hand if you want to give Bob permission to tell the teachers that they can teach the 10 commandments to your children and their grandchildren." Men and women, every hand went up. I was shocked and amazed. At the very end, I asked for feedback. One of the testimonies that really touched me was when a man said, "I now am at peace knowing that I can die and my children will still know what it means to be a good child." Listen to some of these other responses.
The security of my child is in learning these commandments. Usalama wa mtoto wangu.
Good.
To be a good person is more than education, it's more than money, it's more than having wealth. Kuwa mtu mwema ni bora kuliko utajiri, bora kuliko elimu.
Good.
About education, my kid, I want my kid to be a good person. The Ten Commandments is, we have understood it well, and we understand it's the foundation of our community. Yeah, that our kids to continue learning things that are helpful in their lives. Like the 10 Commandments will help them to have a good foundation for their lives. If they do not have this, they don't have a foundation for their life.
The next day, I met the teachers over lunch. The teachers are excited about teaching the 10 Commandments to the children. I gave them 3 large posters with the 10 Commandments written in Swahili. Thank you, Walgreens. At the very end of all this, I got some great news and some challenging news. The great news is that these kids are scoring higher than the kids in the public schools. In fact, some of the public school teachers came to this school to see how the teachers are doing it. I found that very encouraging. I also found out that they call the school the Mzungu School. Mzungu means white man. It's a white man's school, so I guess I should be honored by that. But the challenging news is that in 2026, when their children will graduate from 2nd grade, I was thinking they'd be old enough to make the long walk to the public schools. But the elders are telling me that the parents don't want to send their children to the public schools because they'll be way ahead of other kids their age. As a result, they are asking me to build another 2-room schoolhouse and add 2 new teachers and eventually 4 new classes. I'm praying about that now and asking the Lord to give me wisdom. I'm guessing it'll be an additional $50,000 for the new school building and another $12,000 per year for teachers' salaries. If any of you have any input on this or any thoughts or ideas, I'd be happy to listen to what you have to say. Well, that's how the trip went. Thank you for praying, and thank you for being concerned. Please continue to pray with me for the Waata and the Water Day people, and ask God that one day they will be worshiping Jesus and thanking him for what Jesus has done for them.